hearing on Senate Bill 92. Senator Doñate, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Chair Flores, and good afternoon to the members of the Senate Committee on Government Affairs. For the record, my name is Fabian Doñate and I represent Senate District 10, which is in the heart of Las Vegas. Today I come before you to speak on Senate Bill 92, which would legitimize street food vendors. I am joined by Mr. Robert Prudy, who is a fellow with the Nevada Latino Legislative Caucus, and members from Make the Road Nevada. And before I begin my remarks, I believe it is important to share my personal story as to why we have arrived at this bill. During the last primary election, many of us who get elected to public office oftentimes rely on our family members to help knock on doors, and I am no different. When I had the chance to go door to door, my mom and my dad both joined me. And it was in that practice that I realized that while my mom and I were doing this, she had shared with me that she had a pre-existing phobia of knocking on doors. Come to find out, the reasoning behind the phobia existed because at an earlier age, my grandmother and my mom would go door to door to sell tamales to make ends meet. It's stories like this and so many others in our community that showcase the spirit of entrepreneurship and the ethic behind our hardworking immigrants. When we aren't afforded the luxury of getting a job, we roll up our sleeves and we find the new means of generating an income to support our families. That's the story of the American dream. It's part of the reason why we're here today, to showcase to some of you the problems that have persisted for this particular population. Today, we have a few remarks prepared to help you understand the issue, so we'll go ahead and proceed with the presentation. I want to speak to you all about the lessons that we have learned from the current state of affairs with respect to our street vending and my strategy to legitimize street food vendors by providing a framework for their opportunity to operate in compliance as a small business and workforce unit. Robert and I will go over some of the background, the limitations of our current regulations, and how my proposed amendment will fix many of the issues that we see moving forward. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Purdy, who will share with you some of the issues that we're seeing nationwide and how they're playing out here in Nevada.
Thank you very much, Senator. Good afternoon, Chair Flores and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Robert Purdy, P-U-R-D-Y, and I am a fellow for the Nevada Latino Legislative Caucus. Let's go to the next slide here. If we can jump into the presentation, SB 92 is an act that relates to street food vending, or otherwise known as sidewalk vending, as referred to in this bill. It requires sidewalk vendors to obtain a vendor license and requires the local board of health to adopt certain regulations. Additionally, SB 92 requires the establishment of a task force on safe sidewalk vending. Street vendors in Nevada have increased in numbers across the state as one of the fastest growing states in the union. This is something that many states have come across. Vendors are substantially made up of people from Latino and immigrant backgrounds. And every county and city has different regulations and definitions for vendors, which could cause confusion for people who are simply trying to operate a business. Existing law grants a governing body of a county or city all powers necessary and proper to address matters of local concern, including sidewalk vending, and that is referring to NRS 244.146. Existing law also authorizes a local board of health to adopt regulations relating to food establishments and include sidewalk vending. It's easy to assume reasons behind sidewalk vendors lacking registration. But by having the county or city govern sidewalk vending in its totality, we must learn that street vendors have not been given the proper support to comply with food and licensing regulations. For example, as every county and city have different regulations and definitions for vendors, it makes it very difficult for vendors to comply with food and licensing regulations put on them by the state and other municipalities. Therefore, to help legitimize street vendors, we first need to recognize that safe sidewalk vending is first and foremost an economic issue. Several other states are taking the lead in regulating sidewalk vendors and allowing them to legally operate in growing metropolitan areas. California sidewalk vendors cannot legally obtain permits to operate, so in response, the state passed SB 972. Which does two things. One, decriminalizes the act of operating a mobile food cart without a license, and to create more streamlined approaches to help sidewalk vendors obtain business licenses and health permits. New York City, known for its famous street food culture, continues to have issues with licensing, and so the New York City Council created a street vendor advisory board in 2021 with members from health regulatory agencies, law enforcement, and business interest groups. This advisory board, similar to the bill provided, provides recommendations and advice on laws and regulations pertaining to sidewalk vendors. Arizona, Utah, and Florida have all passed similar legislation that seek to reform regulations for food vendors as well. As Nevada becomes a more popular destination, it's also important to maintain public safety near our gaming properties while also allowing vendors a legal, reasonable way to operate in a residential area. Provide vendors easier access to licensure, acquisition, reforming, or any bureaucratic barriers. We really just want to make sure that these people are allowed to operate the business with minimal but reasonable regulations in place, and also is going to allow access to proper permitting requirements. The other part of this bill is to create the task force on safe sidewalk vending in the Office of the Secretary of States, to review and reform existing laws and regulations, address the needs of sidewalk vendors and mobile units, as well as collaborate with local jurisdictions, businesses, and law enforcement to ensure the safety of vendors and preserve public health of the community as well. In closing, reforming regulations for vendors are necessary. They are a net positive for all members of the community and in support of the spirit of entrepreneurship that makes Nevada such a great state. If you ask the stakeholders about legitimizing sidewalk vendors, there's a general consensus that regulations for sidewalk vendors are necessary because they benefit all stakeholders in the equation. Consumers will have the assurance that health, labor, and safety standards are followed, whereas state institutions will be able to regulate vendors with new set of laws and regulations so that sidewalk vendors will have the opportunity to operate in compliance as well as a small business and workforce unit.
Thank you so much, Robert. Chair Flores, if I may, I also have, Mr. Purdy went over just the national
And if I
trend.
could just have you identify again,
Oh,
please.
yep, Senator Fabian Doñate. Mr. Purdy, describe to you what's happening nationally. It's not a state-specific issue that we're only having in Nevada, but I think it's important for you to also understand what's happening on the ground. So I also have Mr. Rivera who can go ahead and share his perspective.